I'm Alison Raaymakers. I'm Senior Collection Manager at the Australian Racing Museum in Melbourne. We're a small museum. We have a staff of one full-time equivalent plus a part-time CEO. So two of us doing that one full-time job, but trying to make things happen. In the spirit of reconciliation, I'd like to pay my respects to the Bunurong people, the traditional custodians of the land that I'm presenting from today. And I'll also acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung people, custodians of the land where our collection's housed and where our exhibitions are shown. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations people who might be here with us online now. So our museum, conceived in 1974, so we're just coming up for our 50th anniversary. Like a lot of museums, we've started small. We're a volunteer-run, passionate volunteers involved in the racing industry who started work bringing a collection together. They managed to get some space at Caulfield Racecourse and started collecting. That went along for a few years. They had a few small displays under the grandstand, and then with the connections they had, Queen Elizabeth opened the museum formally in 1981. We've since then managed to get MAP accreditation. We have our professional staff, and we've grown a little bit. We now have an exhibition space that's based at the MCG inside the Australian Sports Museum, so our Thoroughbred Racing Gallery, we exhibit there, and we're dedicated to preserving the history of thoroughbred horse racing in Australia. Our collection's about 38,000 objects, and that spans quite a range of subject areas, anything to do with horse racing, horses in Australia or Australians who are succeeding overseas, plus a library and research collection of about 9,000 records, 9,000 objects. Some of the highlights in our collection, we start with Carbine's spectacular 1890 Melbourne Cup trophy, silver tarzas presented to Carbine when he won the Cup, Billy Elliott's saddle used on Farlap, and the bridle that Farlap wore for his last race in Agua Caliente, along with Tommy Woodcock's travel documents from that trip. We've got some fabulous racewear and millinery. So Marcia Hill, Caroline Berkowitz, Lillian Frank are names that you may recognise. I was asked to present about the activities module. So we use three areas mostly. Entry, where we've got about 2,800 records, inward loans, where we've got about 1,200 or 1,100, and outward loans, where there's about 252 records. A fair disparity between inward and outward loans. We work in a slightly different way to a lot of other museums, where we don't do a lot of external loans. We do them mostly with the Sports Museum. So we bring in all the objects for our exhibitions. We manage all the third-party loans, and then we make one consolidated loan to the Sports Museum. We've got a great relationship with them. We've been working with the Sports Museum for about 15 years. But just stepping back a touch, like everybody else, we started with the manual accession register, entered chronologically, not searchable, no index cards to go with it. So if you wanted to find old records, we're sitting there flicking through pages for about 5-7 years, or a little bit longer in some cases. We managed to get an upgrade. We went to InMagic for a while. Brilliant step up, and this is where I came into the museum, to work with a flat file database of some 20,000 records without any transactional history, without any object histories preserved, and without any transactional capacity. Things like 3,500 different entries, including, once we started sorting out the data to migrate to Vernon, 3,500 entries for people's records. But amongst that were things like Bart's name spelt 13 different ways, Cummings Bart, JB Cummings, Cummings JB, and a few interesting spellings along the way as well. So moving to Vernon in 2014 was a coup for us. But the other reaction was, oh my goodness, what have we done? So much work to try and get our data sorted. And it's 10 years down the track. We're still working on it, but we've made some big progress. One of the things that we worked to, and it's been an interesting process going back and having a look at this again for this talk, was how our workflow happens. Trying to actually think logically, going from this flat file system, one record for an object has everything in it. How do we actually translate that to Vernon? And how do we think about our processes? Because we hadn't had to. We'd inherited a system that was just running along. How do we work? What do we do? Was an interesting process. I couldn't find the original form that we did with Kate when we were working through this. So I've gone back and had a look at it myself now to try and generate. And that's been a worthwhile process because I think there's some more changes coming to our database and the way we use it. So entry module, firstly, we tried to split our processes into two. We've got the acquisition process where things are coming formally into the collection, and a receipt process, which is things that are passing through our collection store. And some of them will end up in the collection, some of them won't. Some of them will end up, they might be a collection that's being assessed for donation. They might be the props that are coming in for an exhibition that Meg mentioned, but trying to break them down. So we've looked at what the different steps are. We've looked at what are the mandatory fields. We've looked at how the workflow progresses from one stage to the other in the process. The Vernon team were fantastic in their advice, and at the time we actually accepted most of their recommendations. We've just recently been able to get the auto-generated gift agreements going. That's something that's taken us a little bit longer. We've had report formats, but to actually have them set up as procedural steps is quite exciting to be able to use those now. So that's our acquisition process. And then receipts, similar, but we also include the bulk move of objects because once the object's been receipted, they're obviously here on site. Looking at some of the details, that's our entry record. It'll look familiar to most of you. We're all going to personalise the way we use the database. We've used the general flag instead of tasks to track some of our step-by-step processes. We've also got, like most museums, some interesting ways that things have come into the collection. I'm sure everybody else has got the found in library and found in store tags that you've had to put in for reasons for arrival. That 50-year history is catching up with us as we go through our collections. The reason we use the receipting process and the sorting process, we get an awful lot of boxes of race books, and Nat, my colleague, will testify to this. She has been spending an awful lot of time sorting through boxes. We want a way to track them. We don't record everything straight into the object table, but there will be the odd thing that comes through. This particular one was an interesting one. There's a couple of those there, but the rest of them might be multi duplicates. So there's no point spending the time on those. We only really catalogue the ones that we want. We actually don't very often use the rejected or considered objects table in this module. We do that sometimes with loans, but not so much with the objects. We don't spend the time to get down to item level. The one that's been fantastic for us, particularly in this era of working from home with COVID, and we have collection stores spread across 3 different locations, is to be able to start to record our documentation into the document references. So putting them in as private documents so they won't ever get published, but to be able to scan and make our documentation accessible wherever we're working has been such a win for us. It's a slow process. It's an as-used process. So new records that we're creating, we'll scan documentation and add it. The 38,000 strong backlog, it's an as-used basis. So as we bring a file out, we'll actually scan it and add it into the database so that we can retrieve them. We haven't used images in the activity module. It's something that we've thought about. Occasionally there's a box come in and you want to track that, but it's a decision that we made that we don't have the resources to do that until we get to item level and we're wanting to access registered objects. Reporting we do straight from the database, and there's some examples of the receipt form that we use or our gift agreement. And then the loans module is the other one that we've been using very regularly. With inward and outward loans, we actually treat them very similarly. We use them in much the same way. Identification numbers, we use an L to identify inward loans. We use an OL for our outward loan files so that when we're filing the records, we can still tell them apart. But it's pretty much as the fields are used. It's nicely intuitive and we're able to work through. Procedural statuses are slightly different for our inward loans versus our outward loans. Obviously, we've got some that lucky enough to purchase for the collection as we go. The administration tab, we use the description field as a bulk handling tool in a similar way that we use the entry module for bulk handling large donations. Before we get to the point of recording detailed descriptions in individual objects, we'll put a quick description into the loan field there. We have made the decision that we're using the activities management tool for the loan renewals. So I know some people choose to keep one record And if a loan's renewed, change the dates and make a record. We've decided that we'd actually use the loan renewal tool, which then gives us a history recorded in the database of when the loans have been recorded. So that all happens automatically for us. We also use the built-in tools for loan returns and return to storage. And again, that documentation tab is just wonderful. Couldn't do it without it. So thank you, Vernon. And the agreements that, again, built into the database, change of loan, so that's for our renewals, returns and donations, and the inward loan agreement auto-generated once the procedural status has changed. And that's a very quick walkthrough of our use of the database and the activities module. If you want to see more, we do have some of our loans up on Vernon browser, so you can have a look at them there, or have a look at what the Sports Museum's doing with the displays if you get to Melbourne and want to have a look. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alison, for sharing that. It was really insightful. I really appreciated how you included the authority terms that you're using for each of the fields in there. That will probably give some other people some ideas. If anyone wants to ask a question, please post it in the chat or just unmute yourself. So I will start, Alison, by asking you, what's been the most useful aspect of activities?
Being forced to think about our process. Going from that, it's been some time, but it's been a slow process, going from that flat file structure to having the structured procedural terms to help us focus what we're doing, and the capacity to scan and attach all the documents.
And are you generating legal agreements? I think
we're using, yes, definitely gift agreements and loan agreements, all reviewed by a legal team before we use them. So yes.
And what part of activities, the module, have you found difficult or challenging? Has there been anything that you thought could be improved?
It's more from our end, I think. It's the legacy data that we've got that brings in so many extra terms that at the time we loaded, we made the decision that we didn't have the resources to do a massive data clean. So we loaded as is. Vernon gave us a lot more resources to actually be able to do that work. And it is happening slowly, but there are some interesting terms that pop up in those authority tables too. So the difficulty would be, planning the workflow, getting the structure right before you start. Hard when you don't know the database and you're going from something that's quite basic to something that's so much more sophisticated and mature. But there's still opportunities for us. We've still got things that we can do, and the more time we spend in the database, the more we actually get to know that.
Question from Paul. Has the online collection generated any loan requests from other organisations?
More image requests, I think, Paul. They've come. People are discovering that we're there. We haven't done a lot of publicising of the browser access yet because we're still reworking our main website. So the links aren't there. It's a word of mouth access at the moment. Regular researchers are finding it. Their genealogists are loving it. The racing buffs are loving it. But loan requests from other institutions, we're directing people there to have a look when they've got questions. But at the moment, no, our external loan requests are quite low because of our relationship with the Sports Museum. So that's our primary exhibition venue.
Question from Rachel. How do you usually deal with those image requests? Required citation, use restrictions, etc.?
All of those. We actually use the inward and outward rights modules as well, and track the requests, track what they're planning to use them for, track whether we know the copyright owners and how much work we've actually done to try and track them down. As much as we can to make sure everybody's doing the right thing.
Any words of advice or lessons learned that you could pass on to anybody who's hasn't started using the activities module or just starting to use it?
Don't be alarmed by it feeling overwhelming, it's absolutely worth having a go, because it will streamline things once it's all set up. One step at a time, learn one bit at a time, and use the table that Vernon have available, because it's a really useful one to actually help organise thoughts, processes, terminologies.